Casey Anthony's parents finally breaking their silence in a one-on-one interview with Dr. Phil. An emotional George Anthony saying Casey's not welcome in his home. Cindy says she would love to see her daughter get married. Joining me, Beth Karras, Gene Casares, correspondents from In Session on our sister network, True TV, and Fran Sherman, a psychotherapist. Check out her website, asktherapistfran.com. All right. Gene, let me start with you. Do you think that we will finally hear whether or not Casey was somehow involved in some sort of malicious way in Caylee's death?
I don't. You know, I watched that full hour. I took notes. I see George and Cindy Anthony on the opposite end of the spectrum in many aspects. I do see that George sees the reality, but Cindy doesn't. She believes that Casey has a brain tumor, postpartum schizophrenia, or grand mal seizures.
Okay, you say they're on opposite sides, Gene. What do you mean? Is it just a medical issue, or is there something more?
I see George accepting the reality that Casey was involved or murdered Caylee. I believe that he thinks so from the answers that I've seen, and that she was involved, more than involved, but responsible. I see Cindy giving excuses, and Cindy admits that she does give excuses, that she wants to see things in the best light possible, but she portrays Casey as a victim to this day.
Interesting. Very interesting. Now, here's another clip from Dr. Phil. Dr. Phil asked George and Cindy about that horrifying smell coming from the trunk of Casey's car.
What do you now believe the smell was from?
Truthfully, to this day, I don't know, to be honest.
Do you want to believe that Caylee was back there? I don't want to believe it, but I mean, I'm going by what investigators have told me. All I know is that Caylee's not with us anymore. I know that. I know that.
Do you believe she was in that trunk?
Beth Karras, I think back to the trial and the discussions that we heard, the phone calls, it smells like a dead body in that car, George having similar comments. Do you think that in this interview, we're going to see candid answers from George and Cindy? Or do you think that we'll see a little bit of spin or much of what they've already offered at trial?
I don't really think that there's anything much new here. I mean, we know now that Casey's not welcome home, at least when George is there. But George went to the police days after the car was located without Cindy knowing it, saying, look, she doesn't know I'm here, but I don't want to believe my daughter's capable of this. But when you smell that smell, you don't forget it. And I'm a former police officer, and I know that smell. And he really it doesn't seem to be changing that position. Cindy also doesn't want to believe her daughter is capable of that and continues to make excuses, as she did on the stand, taking the fall for the chloroform searches. So I see consistency in their positions, and I suspect that they wanted to know the truth. They got as much as any of us got out of that trial, and I mean, Casey may have been exonerated by the jury, but the jurors didn't think she was innocent. They just didn't see enough evidence. They didn't know what crime to call it.
It's very interesting, and I wonder through this interview if her parents think that she is innocent. See, it becomes kind of complicated. We're going to keep talking about this, but first, I want to show you guys something. This is from Casey Anthony, or excuse me, not from Casey Anthony, or apparently it's a reaction, according to a source, that Casey Anthony had to this tell-all. If we can show this. I want to show this because it's very important to go through all sides of this, and as I understand it, she's upset that her parents continue to seek the spotlight, that Casey just wants her mom to be a mom. Fran, what does this tell you about Casey Anthony, Cindy, George, the family dynamic here? Why are they doing this interview?
I think they're doing this interview because I think that in some way they want to exonerate themselves. I mean, we all know that on the stand, George was accused of abuse, and I think that he wants to say that he is a good guy and didn't do anything wrong. And I think Cindy is saying that her husband is a good husband and is loving. So I think it's really about them saying to the world, we were good parents, we did the best we could. And I think all of Cindy's you know, hesitation about Caylee. I mean, she's her mom, and I think no matter what, as a mom, no matter what your kids do, you love them and you deny, because to wrap your mind around the fact that your own child could have killed your grandchild is just, I think, too overwhelming for her to emotionally comprehend.
On that same note, it must be so difficult for Cindy. She lives with George. She loves him. He feels one way, yet she's trying to sort of hold out hope, it seems, for Caylee. Now, I want to show you one other thing. This is from Cindy Anthony, and let's take a look at this. This is her reaction. This is, she says, I would love to see her be happy either in a career or in a family setting. You know, I'd love for her to get married. And if she so chooses, and if she's healthy, to be able to be a mom again. Fran, I just heard you there. What do you think about this? All of this surrounding Caylee, I don't know if her parents think she's guilty or innocent, but they want her to become Cindy, I should say, would be interested in seeing her become a mom again.
You know, I think Cindy is just wishing that, again, denial is such a wonderful defense mechanism. We only believe what we want to believe. And I think in her hope, because we all hope to have this perfect, wonderful child and this wonderful grandchild, and I'm sure she aches for her granddaughter. So the thought of maybe her daughter somehow magically getting better and being able to be a family member again and having another child again is her wish. Do I think professionally that Caylee should be a mom again? No, of course I don't think that. I think Caylee is not a well girl. I mean, but I think Cindy is also in serious denial. So it's just sad.
You know, it just seems so troubling and tough for them as a family to get through this. Jean, what do you make of George and Cindy, but especially this comment about having another child? What do you make of the idea that after all they've been through, now the hope is maybe they'll have another grandchild with Caylee taking care of her?
I think there are a lot of things you can think about from that statement. Number one, if you think your daughter truly in your heart had involvement with the death of Caylee and you want her to have another child. Number two, she longs to see Caylee. So what you were just saying, Ryan, about that Caylee wants her mother to be a mother and to just stay out of the limelight, but yet her mother is saying such a motherly thing to her, trying to communicate to her through the Dr. Phil show. So I think that is interesting. But also something new we learned through this interview. Cindy said that she's been in therapy for 3 years now. I didn't know she was in therapy during this entire time, but she's realized that she makes excuses for everybody. That's one of her faults.
Okay, speaking of excuses, there's a lot of talk about Caylee Anthony's medical history.
And then she started foaming at the mouth and shaking uncontrollably. And from my limited first aid experience, it looked like a grand mal seizure to me.
Did she really suffer from seizures? And could that explain why Caylee supposedly drowned in the pool?
Instead, she acted as if it never happened.
In my gut, I know she's still okay. We're going to get our little girl back. And she's going to be just as she was.
It's insane. It's bizarre.
She was out partying, she was laughing, she was joking with people when allegedly her child's body was in the trunk of her car.
Her name is Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez.
Why didn't you call 31 days ago?
I've been looking for her.
Was something medically wrong with Caylee Anthony? A shocking new theory is coming out of George and Cindy Anthony's sit-down with Dr. Phil today. Get this. Cindy says Caylee was having a seizure, and that's why she couldn't save little Caylee. She suggests that Caylee had a brain tumor, and that's why Caylee died. Not the duct tape, not the chloroform. Here's what Dr. Phil told our own HLN's Joy Behar.
I think her saying what she's saying about the tumor lacks such credibility to an objective finder of fact that, I mean, that doesn't wash. I mean, nobody's going to believe that.
No.
So here's the question. Are the Anthonys still making excuses? Let's bring back Beth and Jean and also Fran Sherman, psychotherapist, joining us as well. All right, Beth, here's a question for you. If this were true and that she was suffering from seizures, why didn't we see the defense bring something like this up at trial? Because there's an explanation as to why Caylee suddenly disappears, Caylee suddenly ends up in the woods. There's a lot of things that would answer.
Good point. More importantly, why would she sit in a jail cell for 3 years facing the death penalty if there was a medical reason for an accident, not a crime, an accident? So it just doesn't hold a lot of water, because I don't think any defense attorney, and I suspect that if Jose Baez heard this, he dismissed it because it's not true, because he wouldn't have allowed to sit in a jail cell. He would have gone to the prosecution to say, wait a second, here's what's going on. This isn't a crime. She was having a seizure.
And Fran Sherman, wouldn't there be medical records, documentation, if she was having seizures and things of that nature, especially in this kind of instance?
Absolutely. And in the state of Florida, in fact, if you have a seizure, you're actually not allowed to drive an automobile, any car, for at least 6 months. And the other part is that if you have a seizure, you really need to be on anti-seizure medication. So it really doesn't make any sense that she would have a seizure. Now, if it was in fact true, it certainly could explain some of her behavior, because seizures do alter your brain chemistry. But again, if she was having a seizure, she would need to be on medication. There would be documentation, and she wouldn't be able to hold her driver's license for at least 6 months.
You know, Jean, why then make up this story now? You know, if we're all sitting back and saying, and even Dr. Phil is saying, hey, it doesn't make sense, the idea of a tumor, they don't have to say anything. They could simply sit back and say, think what you want. We don't want to have anything to do with this anymore. But they offer this theory that just doesn't seem to vibe. Why even give an answer?
Cindy offers the theory, not George. Cindy. Okay. I think she believes it with her heart and her soul. I truly think she believes it, has made herself believe it. But we also know that in 2007, and this was brought out on the show, that Jesse Grund called the hospital emergency, took Casey because he thought she was having a seizure. She was in the hospital for 3 days. They did a lot of different tests and found nothing.
Jean, you bring up a great point. Thank you for bringing that up. The first time we heard about Casey having seizures, as Jean just said, was from her ex-fiancé, I should say, Jesse Grund. He witnessed this episode, and let's take you back to 2008 and listen to what he told police back in September of that year.
I woke up, tried to get up. She was kind of draped down across, her legs were across me and her head was on the sofa, so I just picked up her legs, moved them to the side while she rested. As I got up, her eyes popped open. It looked like she was just staring straight. I said her name a couple times, and then she started foaming at the mouth and shaking uncontrollably. And from my limited first aid experience, it looked like a grand mal seizure to me. So I moved a table out of the way, turned her on her side. Her lips turned slightly blue. She continued seizing for probably about, 6 to 8 seconds. Once she got done, she let out this sigh, and then her eyes popped back open again and then closed, and she was non-responsive. She claimed to me that it may have been because she drank too many Red Bulls.
You know, what's interesting about this, Fran, is he says grand mal seizures. It's the same words that Cindy uses in this Dr. Phil interview. What do you make of that? Do you think she took that from what she read in Jesse's interview and said, hey, here is something that can explain what's going on with my daughter?
Yes, absolutely. I think that because she, and I agree with what Jean said, she believes it. She needs to wrap her mind around something that will make what happened with her daughter somehow palatable, somehow that she can go to sleep at night and still, that's her daughter. She loves her despite anything. And if she can believe that there was something physically wrong, she can sort of explain away all of the behavior.
And Fran, there's a source that says maybe that Cindy thinks that this is why she can't tell the truth. Let's just talk about this medically. If she did have a brain tumor that caused her to have certain seizures, would that alter her ability to separate fact from fiction?
No. I've worked with a lot of people who have had seizure disorders and brain tumors and all sorts of traumatic brain injury, and it does not disable them from telling the truth. It does make it sometimes hard for them to, have their memory intact, but the truth is the truth, and usually they can distinguish that clearly, and it depends on the brain injury as well.
All right, Beth, I look at this interview, I hear what they're saying, they're talking about their side of things. I wonder if, looking back, if they were consulting their counsel or consulting legal advisors, if they think this was a good idea. Do you think this is George and Cindy saying, I don't care what the ramifications are, I'm going to speak out? Or is this something that maybe people have told them, hey, you don't need to do this? Why are you speaking out, especially if people may look at what you say and say, hey, folks, I just don't believe it?
Well, you ask a lot of good questions. I suspect that they did consult with their attorney about this. There is some money going to a charity, allegedly, in payment for the interview. So they got a benefit for a charity for this. They're fairly consistent when things are saying. It kind of is feeding a public curiosity now. Maybe they're thinking people will, get off their backs about making a statement. And I'm sure people counseled them also not to speak. What are they going to gain from it personally? But I really don't see anything really inconsistent with what we've known before, with a few little tidbits right now. That a few new things we're learning, but not much. It just feeds the voyeur and a lot of us to see them and see how they're coping a few months later.
And Beth, you make a really great point, so I got to ask Jean about this as well. Jean, I thought that George and Cindy wanted to avoid the public spotlight. We've seen so many times they're trying to get people off their lawn, get people away from them. They're just trying to live their own lives, yet they inject themselves back into the public. So isn't this going to attract more attention and make it harder for them to get on with their lives?
Maybe this is the only interview they've done. All monies are going to Caylee's fund, which is their foundation, their organization. The last we heard, it didn't have monies. So maybe this is their way to get it off the ground. And of course, it's to fund for missing children, to help find missing children, and also grandparents' rights. Those are the areas that the Anthonys are going into. All right, one parent expressing anger, another happiness for the future. We're talking about George and Cindy Anthony here, both still missing their granddaughter, Caylee. More on the emotional toll that the past 3 years have had on George and Cindy.
Casey was the last one that I saw with Caylee. 1 and 1 adds up to 2, sir, in my mind.
I will walk every inch of this earth and open every door and knock on every door. And I will look in every nook and cranny until I find her.
Look at what George and Cindy have been through. What an emotional toll on George and Cindy Anthony, under public scrutiny for 3 years, all the while grieving the death of their granddaughter, Caylee. And now for the first time, they're telling their story on national TV. Let's bring back in Beth Karras, Jean Casares, and also Fran Sherman, psychotherapist. All right, Fran, what do you make of the emotional toll? They have been through so much. They've lost their granddaughter. They don't have a relationship, it seems, with Casey. What is this doing to them, not only on a personal level, but even as a couple?
Well, on a personal level, I mean, it's unimaginable for you to think about losing your granddaughter, and really, in essence, they've lost their daughter as well. So it's like another death, because as far as we know, they don't have a relationship with Casey. And then as a couple, again, they're both on opposite ends of the spectrum, where George is sort of maybe a little angry, a little defiant, and sort of defending himself. And then Cindy is just so mournful and making all kinds of excuses. And, in public, they seem to stand together, but I would imagine that in private, it would be really, really hard for them to reconcile, because also during the trial, there were so many things that were said negative about George that I can't imagine that Cindy wouldn't wonder if any of that was true. So I would think that they need a lot of couples work if they're not, they did say she was having therapy, that she had been going to therapy, which we did not know before. But I think it's traumatic on every level. And it's amazing that they're together. It's just amazing.
Honestly, it must be. You could see the tension on their faces. And Dr. Phil, he asked George and Cindy these tough questions about their relationship, not only with each other, but also with Casey. Let's listen to another clip from the Dr. Phil show.
You know that she lies, but yet you say, okay, I believe you. She's asleep. She's this. She's that. She's not there. She's with this Zanny, the nanny, for 2 years, and you've never met her. You don't know her. Let me finish. You don't know who the father is. You never met her boyfriend, who she says she's staying with. You don't know her friends. You didn't verify her employment.
About facing some tough questions. Jean, I have a quick second here. Where do you think they go from here?
Well, I want to know about the accusations of sexual assault, George perpetrating that on Caylee, incest. We didn't hear that question, but in Cindy's defense, I listened to the testimony. Caylee's lies were elaborate. Anybody would have believed them. They were good. They were the best I've ever heard of anybody.
It's amazing. This interview riveting, and we have to get to the bottom. As Jean said, the abuse, so much else to address here. We'll have to see what comes from this interview. Well, coming up next.